And then the only other component to that is we do have a national effort named Right on Crime. There's some flyers on that in the back. We started this a couple of years ago when we realized that there are conservatives and those on the right side of the aisle all over the country that want to start working on this issue on criminal and juvenile justice. They just don't know how. They don't have the words, they don't have the tools, they don't know what they should be talking about. And so we brought together a group of conservative leaders to give them those tools and give them those words and give them the research that they need. And Right on Crime has now been in all 50 states in some form. And so we're helping leaders in other states work on legislation and do media outreach in those issues as well.
Thank you. I know that I would love for the Libertarian Party to have a weekly column in the Statesman. That would be wonderful. But maybe during question and answer we can talk more about that media outreach and ways for smaller organizations to get that done. I think that would be very helpful. Mr. Simpson?
Well, I guess my organization might be a little bit distinct in some ways. We have a couple of different arms for advocacy. Oh, actually, I wanted to back up. The other, I guess kind of the fifth priority for us is privacy and technology, and we're working with Greg on basically all that stuff, but particularly the cell phone tracking bill. And so, actually, those are some things I would like to talk about when we get into specifics of ledge work. I think there's a lot that folks in this room can do to ensure privacy. So anyway, but we'll get to that. My organization's a little bit unique in terms of this panel. We make an effort to activate or get involved our activists and our folks that are already members of the organization, and then others that are interested in the specific issues. So, for example, we worked with parents in the Dallas area that were concerned about suspensions of their children, basically, and kind of over-incarceration of the classroom. So we put out materials, both information about our issues and also kind of activist toolkits. And often when folks just start Googling for, what do I do if my kid's suspended, they'll start finding like our youth rights manual and other materials like that, look through our website and starts to see that there's some opportunity for working with our organization on local issues. So we've been developing that. It's certainly, we haven't perfected it, but we're definitely, feel like we're moving forward. We had a few local folks that we've actually been able to coordinate and do ledge visits with. So we're starting to even see some of our local work start to be a part of our legislative work, and we certainly kind of incorporate it into litigation as well. So we've got the kind of activist outreach. We also do a lot of work in the media, and I think that it's absolutely critical when you are talking about issues that are easily misunderstood, like privacy, like drug law reform, to have the right messaging so that people aren't confused by what the words you're saying and miss the kernel of truth, right? And so, I think echoing what Jeanette and probably everybody else would say, thinking about how you portray your issue in the media is incredibly important. And it has to do with your effectiveness in all the other arenas that I guess we kind of operate in, and I think just about anywhere. Then we also do legislative work. I work with a group of volunteers and UT grad students, and we go and testify on bills that are important to the ACLU. A lot of them, almost all are civil liberties. And then finally we do litigation, which is probably what folks actually know us for. So we try to coordinate all that into one coherent strategy, which also is not always perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Texas NORML, we, in the past year, I guess, have really grown so that now our focus year-round is, again, it's always outreach, but now we're able to have specific outreach. For example, I'm trying to reach out to more women because that's in the public polls, we see that women are 10 to 12% behind men in favoritism of reforming drug laws. So, in coming out publicly and being a woman in the movement, just by setting the example, I try to encourage more women to become involved and to talk, just to have the conversation, which is the biggest outreach tool that we have, is trying to make it a public conversation. So we also do that by an athletic group that one of our directors started. So we have people walking around in a group around Town Lake, or doing a 5K or a 10K soon, all wearing shirts that say Team Hope Through Cannabis with a huge list of ailments and conditions on the back that it can help. So it's just raising awareness that we're out there, we're part of the community, we're not just inviting you to our reggae show and expecting you to act exactly like we do, and that's the only way that you can be a part of our group. Instead, we're trying to reach out to people on other levels and just connect and show that we're part of the community. We're no longer a subculture that we tried to be and had to be for so long. We also reach out to people in our movement that we know there's a specific need for, like patients. In fact, our Director of Patient Outreach is here tonight, Vincent Lopez. So I want to acknowledge that if anybody wants to speak to him. We also recently have a veterans liaison who is not local in Austin, but he is in Killeen, and so he's very active. He's also a school teacher. So we're just reaching out to groups that either have a need or that we're not really hearing from, and we want them to be a part of this conversation. And otherwise, just in having that conversation and bringing it to the public, making it okay and not taboo to talk about, I think the most important thing is to find out what people's concerns are on any level, like education or where we're spending our money, and try to explain to them how changing our drug laws could change something and benefit their own concern. I think the most important thing in talking to people is that you can't expect them to agree with you on all points, and you can't try to force your exact method of your message. You have to find out where their interest lies and then kind of conform your message. Believe me, there's something affiliated with the drug war that you can reach out and connect to somebody on. So I think that's just a big key in awareness.
Thank you. You get to start the next round, which is what you're doing this legislative session. And I don't think we have time to go into detail about specific bills, but if you could, a general overview of what your goal is, and also, are you doing, what does your organization focus on most? Is it lobbying days? Is it testifying? Is it, talking to the legislators and providing research? So if we could get 2 minutes on that from each of you, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, this was our big year to really make an attempt at lobbying and at being really involved with the legislature, not just on our own as individuals, whoever felt like doing it, but up until this year, we had put together an activist training guide. I held an activist training day where we tried to get people involved to go on their own, and here's how you find out who your legislator is. Here's how you contact them, and some guidelines. This year we stepped it up a bit and did that as well, but we also, we put out a voter's guide. Yeah, there's some copies of all this stuff back there if you guys want to take a look at it. We made our first attempt at a voter's guide. Most of the people we heard from were Libertarians, thank you. So we had some really positive responses, but I will say that even the Republicans that we had, even the worst that it wasn't bad all the way across the board. So I think that showed a good thing, a good climate temperature kind of check for us. So that was helpful, and then we put together, we realized that a lot of people just are not educated, so we can't just assume that they're going to pass a bill that they, one, don't even know about, and two, wouldn't understand anyway. So we put together a legislative education package, and that's back there as well. We distributed that amongst our members, and we distributed it most often, if we could, by constituent, and otherwise the Texas NORML representatives brought those to the legislators. We tried to keep track of the feedback and connect people with their legislators. And we did hold a lobby day this session, first time, a lot of lessons learned, but it was a good day. And we're just starting to build those relationships and make our presence known at the Capitol. So it's a first effort, but I think we took a lot of big steps this session, and looking forward to trying harder and learning how to do it better next session.
Thank you. I think
if I could just say, I don't have, there is information in the packet, but there are 2 bills in the House right now. One has been in committee already, which is a decrim bill. It would just lower possession for up to 1 ounce to a fine only. And the other one is an affirmative defense bill, which would just, and I say just because I think it's important to emphasize to these conservatives who don't understand what these do, that they are not legalization bills. Neither one of them are. So when that's the concern, you can't go at them with, weed should be legal and we should tax it, because that's not what either one of these bills does. So there's really just not a point to that conversation. So being concise and emphasizing what the bill doesn't, which are their concerns, and emphasizing what it does and how it helps. The other one opens up a conversation between patients and their doctors, and we're waiting for that to be scheduled. The committee hearing has been requested but not scheduled. So look up those two bills, HB 184, HB 594. Texas NORML's website has information on it. But if the affirmative defense bill passed, then not only could a patient talk to his doctor and then neither would need to be concerned, but if the patient were arrested, then the doctor and the patient could have that conversation with the jury, which I think is an important way to sell it, that all you're doing is trying to open up the jury and the doctor's office with the truth.
Thank you. I will say that I think the LP is transitioning from encouraging individuals to going up there and getting our, complete, thorough legislative agenda, sort of at the same process you were in. And then also I'd love to hear about the lessons from lobbying day. So maybe if someone wants to follow up either of those two in questioning, I think that could be very useful for the LP and where they are now. But go ahead, sorry.
Well, let's see. So the question is, what are we doing right now in the legislature, and what are some
and how are you going about it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there are a couple ways to summarize it. One way to think about it is that a lot of the legislators, they are legislators for 6 months out of every 2 years, and there are thousands of bills. And so our expertise on any little niche issue for them is incredibly valuable. And then our willingness to run issues around from office to office, to be the person that links the Senate to the House, basically all the things that people assume happen internally up at the Capitol that maybe do or don't, like you can be a part of making all that happen, and that helps move your agenda. And the more folks that are doing those kinds of things help move the kind of bills you want to see out there. So you have an opportunity to, I would definitely highlight the opportunity to give your representative or senator direct input on bills you think should be filed, or bills that they are filing, or bills that they're considering maybe. And then the other big opportunity is testimony in a hearing. If there's something that you have expertise on that you want to go talk about, hearings are a great time to kind of give some input to the committee. I wanted to just quickly talk about a couple of bills that we're going to be watching in terms of our goals that all really relate to privacy and technology, and to some degree really law enforcement overreach into our lives. One is the tracking of students at schools, working with Heather and a lot of other folks on basically ending the practice of tracking students internally to schools. And also, we're monitoring all the drug testing bills, so required to do a drug test before you can receive TANF benefits, before you can receive unemployment. We're working on Facebook privacy and social media privacy that would bar employers from demanding your password to your private inbox before you can be hired, which unfortunately is happening in some places. And then we're working on the cell phone tracking and the drone bill and the email confidentiality. And then one thing that I think I'd like to work on someday, and there's folks in this group that would probably understand why, there's the automatic license plate reader is a real issue that hasn't been addressed by but I think probably, yeah. So there's at least one person that's familiar. But I think that's an issue that the ledge has really let fly, and somebody needs to get them moving on that as well. And the final one is DNA collection upon arrest rather than conviction. The ACLU obviously believes that you are innocent until proven guilty. You should not be collecting DNA until you're convicted. So,
thank you.
Well, our legislative approach is very burdensome sometimes. There's quite a bit going on this year. The foundation as a whole is tracking 1,500 bills. My center line is tracking just over 700 bills. Only 30 of those are bills that we've written, so unfortunately there's some other ones that we have to work on. And the reason that there's so many is that every single time we read a bill that had a criminal penalty for what we didn't think should be a criminal penalty, or that increased occupational licensing or put more requirements in occupational licensing, we put it in our tracker to track it and make sure that we were testifying against in committee. And that should give you an idea of how many times the legislature slaps a criminal penalty or an occupational license on something, that there's over 600 bills on something relating to those issues right now in the legislature. Our exact efforts, we always begin with our sponsor, the person that we're working with. If it's a bill that we support, we make sure that they know we support them and they're available to provide talking points or research if they need it. If it's a bill that we oppose, you always go and you tell them that you oppose it. They hate to be blindsided with this stuff in committee, and they're actually very willing to work with people if they know that you oppose one of their bills. So that's a really high priority for us. We actually won't testify against it if we haven't gone to tell them that we oppose it. So that's actually something I'll be doing in the next week is making my rounds and sharing some unfortunate news with some people. So after we reach out to the sponsor, then you begin the committee work, and that's making sure that you have the votes lined up in committee. That's making personal meetings with every single one of the committee members to find out where they stand on it and see if you can answer any of their questions beforehand. Because often they've already made up their minds before the committee hearing. So public testimony, unfortunately, doesn't mean as much as we wish it did. So once you make sure that you have the votes, then you get the hearing, and your sponsor has to request the hearing from the committee chair that the bill is referred to. So as soon as we know that we have enough bills to support it, or I'm sorry, enough votes to support it, or enough votes to kill it, we make sure that the sponsor knows that it's ready for a hearing. After hearing, then you begin to reach out to folks that are going to be able to get it to the floor, and that's a different process whether you're working in the House or the Senate. There's a calendars committee in the House that has to vote for something to go to the floor. In the Senate, it's the 2/3 rule. So you have to make the reach out in that sense to get it to the floor, because it's an uphill battle. There's a lot of stuff that comes out of committee favorably reported. Not everything gets to the floor, and that's something that you have to be very proactive about, is making sure people know you need this to get to the floor. And then you start the whole process over again in the next House. Some of the specific stuff, I'm just going to run through our specifics really, really quickly. We're working on legislation that would provide more effective probation monitoring in the counties. We feel like if they're doing a good job, the state should reward them. If they're doing a bad job, the state should not reward them. We're working on state jail reform. About 80% of the offenders in state jails are either low-level drug offenders or low-level property offenders. These are not threats to the public safety and should not be in a state jail. So we're working on requiring, instead of a term in the state jail, probation for those offenders, which we know will be more effective and cheaper for the state anyway. Victim offender conferencing. When someone has committed a crime against a particular victim, it's that victim who has been harmed and not the state. We think that that victim should have more control of their process and not the government. Rule of lenity. This would require, if there's a particular term in an offense, an element or a mental state that is unclear, it gets construed against the state rather than the defendant, because the state's the one that wrote the legislation, so they should lose if they're unclear about it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, that one's been filed, and I think we're going to have a hearing in the next 2 weeks on that one. A sunset review of all occupational licensing. Texas is one of the worst states about this. Over a third of all of our occupations, people working in Texas are under a license and have to ask the government for permission to just go to work. And so we're going to pass or work on legislation that will require a sunset review of all occupational licenses to see if it's truly necessary for the government to get that involved in the free market.
I hate to cut you off, but we might need to move on at
sure.
this moment. I will say thank you, and especially thank you for the tip about approaching the sponsor first if you oppose a bill. I think that sounds like excellent advice.
Sorry, I dragged on so long.
You wouldn't know unless you were an insider. So thank you.
Some of the things I do is I would teach 120 people a week concealed handgun license, the course. And I stand in front of my class and I'll ask them, and I'll say, well, what has brought you to this point that makes you want to get a concealed handgun license? What's going on right now in your life that you want to get a concealed handgun license? And they'll tell me, well, what's going on in the federal government? I said, okay, and I'll go around the entire room, and everyone will say the same thing, because what's going on in the government? They're talking about taking our guns away and all this other stuff. And then I'll let them know that in Travis County, we have 600,000 registered voters. There's 600,000 registered voters in Travis County. Out of that 600,000, only 10% cannot vote in their elections. Only 10%. And so I asked them, did you vote? And then, I informed them that our legislators only meet odd years. Last time they met was 2011. They're meeting right now until June 2013. Next time they meet is 2015. Things like open carry was on the table in 2011. Open carry did not pass. Do you know that the state of Texas is one of the very few states that you cannot open carry handgun? Most states in the United States, you can open carry handgun. Texas is one of those states you cannot. We lost open carry back in 1995 when we got concealed carry. So they took open carry away because we weren't paying attention. Right? So you got to get involved and pay attention to the way some of these bills are written and what happens in committee. What did you say? What happens when they come out of
well, then you have conference committee.
Conference committee, exactly. Because then they will water them down. So you got to pay attention to what goes on through the entire process. Making sure it comes out of calendars. And what happens in conference committee, because that's very important. So, those are just, some of the things you got to focus on.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we, at the head of every session, we always put together a legislative agenda. What are the things we want to accomplish on freedom to travel and property rights type issues? And so we make sure that every legislator, particularly the Transportation Committee members, get that from us in enough time to be able to think about what bills they might want to sponsor for us. Then we try to meet one-on-one with lawmakers, particularly, again, the Transportation Committee, sometimes the Land and Resource Management Committee, because that's the property rights stuff. But I have to say, with ACLU and TPPF, they get access that grassroots groups do not get. I will tell you that right now. It takes me months sometimes to get on a member's calendar. They have every way under sunshine, all these excuses why they can't meet with us, but if someone like TPPF walks through their door, they're instantly given access. I've seen it happen, so it's very sad. But when you're grassroots and you don't have a paid staff, somehow you're just kicked to the curb, like you don't somehow do worthy work for the citizens. So that's the hard part, is getting access. But if you can meet one-on-one, we do definitely reach out to the members so they know if we oppose their bill before we go in committee and do that. Then we also have lobby days as well. I think this has been our 4th one that we did just last week. And we had our largest group yet, and it was wonderful. We do a lot with that if you want to know more details with it. But one of the things we are always sure to hand out, we try to do it after the bill filing deadline, and then I pour through hundreds of bills myself. There is no staff. I don't have anyone to help me. And we put together our comprehensive bill list. And these are just the bills that were the most egregious or are bills that we are trying to push. There are literally hundreds of bills in transportation that we have to follow, and most of them are bad, and we have to try and kill them all single-handedly, because we're pretty much the only group that focuses on transportation in the state of Texas. So we've tried to align ourselves with other groups. There's over 300 grassroots groups that we work with, including groups like the Libertarian Party, liberty-minded groups, you name it, Tea Parties, 912s, a lot of different Democrat groups have similar issues that align with ours. And so another thing we'll do is testify in committee, like everyone's talked about. And we do like to issue a lot of press releases. We always start our lobby day with a press conference on the South Capitol steps. And we always make sure there's really good visuals with lots of signs, stop tolling Texas or whatever, stop selling our roads or whatever. There's all kinds of little messaging things we can do with that. And we did get pretty good press coverage. I don't know if you saw it on Austin TV on Tuesday night, but that was us. Then we also like to be, as was mentioned, a liaison or a resource. We're pretty much the only one that's not an official think tank that puts together white papers. I do a lot of extensive research. The abuses of tolling worksheet you see in the back was by going through TxDOT's 10-year plan, they call the UTP, and found out all the taxpayer subsidies that are going into these toll roads. That means they're building roads with your tax money, but charging you again to drive on. Our legislators were not aware of this, and so I went and found ways to prove it. And when I added up the figures, in the next 10 years, they will spend $10 billion in tax money. This makes their eyes pop open and realize just how bad the abuses are that are taking place. But if we hadn't put that together, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So it's very important to do that, and providing talking points and such. We also do legislative report cards at the end of every session, and we also do voter guides. All of this is really hard to do with unpaid volunteers every session, going through hundreds of votes sometimes to put these together. We also put out a bill alert. If it gets out of committee, that's when the animal really gets big, because now it's not just a few transportation committee members you're dealing with, now you're dealing with the entire legislature of either the House or Senate or both. So we do a lot of bill alerts, both electronically, and we'll even have volunteers come through the Capitol and put it underneath their doors or personally hand it to every single office, so they are without excuse when they say, oh, I didn't know what was in that bill. You know how they do this all the time, right? Oh, I didn't know I voted for that. Well, they're without excuse on transportation, because they are always put on notice before they take the vote.
Terri.
Oh, okay, yes.
Short, unfortunately.
If I could just finish with one thing, we also like to do open letters to legislators and get a lot of media play with that, where we'll do an open letter to the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, for instance, and tell them what we want and what we don't want. And we have it signed on by hundreds of groups, and that really helps get their attention too. And we actually saw committee members running into a room one time, sorting through, looking to see if a group in their backyard was a co-signer to that list. So those are the things that the grassroots versus a think tank policy type group have to do to try and get their attention, because we don't get their attention just by being, you know, a certain group like TPPF or whatever. They garner a ton of respect around the Capitol for very good reason, but grassroots groups have to kind of go at it from a different angle, so that's kind of why I mentioned that.
Thank you. And it sounds like you do incredible work, and I, for one, would love to hear more about the open letters. That sounds like a very powerful tool. It's Greg's turn.
So I got myself very fortunate to have a couple of very, very good mentors as regards entering the legislative process at the state level. I'm working with some folks who have been very tapped into how things operate at the state legislature for on the order of 20 years. So they've been able to see the importance of relationship building, the importance of how things change over time, how things wax and wane, and understand that there's an important factor, an important strategic factor as far as timing is concerned. And so that's one of the reasons why we feel like right now is a good opportunity for the legislation that we're working on as regards technology and privacy. So some of the things that we are doing, and again, we're learning, or I'm learning as I go along. I try to see what sort of lessons I can glean. So I'll pass along what we've seen here, a lot of which are echoing what the other panelists have been saying so far. One thing that is important, I think, for me to recognize is that as a citizen, you can initiate a lot of these processes yourselves. You can draft legislation. You can go to a hearing. You can go to your elected officials' offices. You can go to any of the officials' offices, talk with their staff members, and let them know what you're working on. This is an important factor because I think if more people knew how easy it is to actually get involved in the process, then we would have a different sort of society. So I want to emphasize that fact. One thing that we've done with the geolocation tracking bill, as well as the email contents bill, is been very careful as far as the selection of who we want to actually file the bill. So we look at the members of the committees that are likely going to see the bill, and we try to find one of the members of the committee to actually file the bill on our behalf. So naturally, then they'll want the bill to actually come up for hearing and have their bill heard. So then comes a strategy that we learned from the drone bill this year, which we thought was very interesting, which is they actually went to, well, with the bill, you can actually have, you have the person who files the bill, and then you can have up to 4 other joint authors of the bill, and as many co-authors of the bill as you would like. And so this is a way of demonstrating the belief in that bill and interest in seeing that bill pass. So on the drone bill, what we saw is they actually instituted a strategy to get as many co-authors as they could. And at this point, they have on the order of over 100 co-authors and joint authors for that bill. Which is important because there's 150 representatives in the House. So that demonstrates something about the likelihood of that passing. So we've been looking to do that same sort of thing, and for the geolocation tracking bill, we're up to, at last count, 69 authors and co-authors. So we think that's a pretty good one. Then we're looking really carefully at who you are actually reaching out to, how you're expending those resources to go and talk to people, and you have to be careful about who you look to next. So we look to the committee members, as was mentioned earlier, and also the calendar committee members also, because you do want to make sure